how do we avoid reducing our judgment making, our critical thinking, or de-skilling, or unintentionally unskilling?
There are lots of smart people thinking about this, like Eric Topol has put out a recent article about de-skilling and never skilling that helps frame things when you're starting to use technology to make decisions for you before you've ever developed any tools to actually make the decisions for yourself. Just the same way, if you're immobile, you get to your muscles atrophy, and physiologically, I don't think the brain works exactly like that, but it's a similar idea.
When you get older, Paulius, give me a call. Then I'll share with you what happens.
That's right. So,
911, what's your emergency?
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. Our guest today is none other than Dr. Paulius Mui, a leading voice in modern primary care education and a true health tech innovator focused on improving how quality and clinician performance are evaluated in ambulatory care. Dr. Mui graduated from Boston University with a degree in economics, earned his medical degree from Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine, and then completed his family medicine residency at Valley Health System Medical College of Virginia. Dr. Mui later served as Director of Clinical Innovation at Next Level Medical, a blogger and speaker on how electronic health records and AI can transform primary care, clinician training, and quality improvement. Dr. Mui also teaches widely on primary care transformation and workforce development. All the while, he has been a practicing physician. And in 2021, Dr. Mui founded X equals Primary Care, XPC, where, among other things, he builds tools and frameworks to move chart review beyond regulation compliance toward meaningful skills measurement and clinician development. Paulius, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lee. That's quite an introduction. My gosh, I'm going to send this to my mom.
She'll be very proud of you, I'm sure.
Yes.
Always. So for the listeners, by way of context, I went on a bit of a rant on this podcast in November about how the world of AI could serve as a key tool in peer review and quality improvement. But my focus was mainly inside the walls of the hospital. You reached out to me to share that you are more than one step ahead of me and producing AI tools in the primary care space with a focus on quality improvement, which led to a rather fun conversation that we had, which led to this invitation. And are you ready to share some of this discussion with our listeners?
Of course, happy to try to grow the field. I think more people should be doing this.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. And let's do this. All right. So question number one, to get us launched and started. So you've written and spoken about the need to better define quality in primary care rather than relying on the proxies of, like I mentioned, compliance or regulatory throughput. So in your mind, just your generic opinion, what should high quality primary care actually look like rather than processes and process improvement?
I agree. So great question. And it's a hard one to answer. I don't think I hold the definitive authority on it, but I do think primary care is about relationships and it's about having familiarity, continuity. There are academic definitions, obviously. People talk about the 4 C's: first contact, continuity, comprehensiveness, and care coordination. I think patients don't really think about it that way. It's just being there for patients, being able to take care of most of the things that they come in with and doing it in a way where you don't have to keep asking who they are and what medical problems they have. Obviously, affordability, accessibility is like how people talk about primary care. I'm obviously a big proponent of that. So I think it less almost matters what words we use to describe it, but it's how patients get care that really is impactful.
The often quoted line from Maya Angelou, which she probably borrowed from other folks before her, it's really not what you say, it's how you make people feel. And part of what you're suggesting is really deepening the relationship with the patient in an effort to achieve the outcome. And part of that outcome is that relationship, but then it's their well-being or what is needed for their health rather than focusing on the processes and all of the structural elements, which goes hand in hand. But what I think you're saying is we've got to find better ways to elevate the ability of the two human beings with all the necessary tools so that the outcome is better. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. And I think that we can also, there's lots of conversations about scaling primary care and what does that mean? And you'll have a VC funded company that says, well, I can text you about these 10 conditions and like, well, we're primary care. I think in a sense, primary care also is something that doesn't have a luxury of saying that this doesn't belong to my organ system or my body part, right? When things get tough and specialists can't handle things, they say follow up with primary care. Because if primary care gets help from a specialist saying, hey, like this is too complex for me, go to neurology. Neurology tries things, medications, procedures, whatever. And when those don't work, where does the patient end up? The neurologist says go back to primary care, right? Like that's the funny part. That comment on scale that I think is helpful to frame about is there are things, these institutions that are less tangible, whether it's marriage or the idea of like parenthood, like those things, no one's trying to scale them per se, but they're like the invisible labor that happens, the ability to be seen, just people, like what we do often is witness people's journeys in their health. And I think that often lives in primary care. Obviously, other physicians, clinicians experience elements of that, and most of them are short-lived and related to a particular condition.
That is so eloquent and rather deep and thought-provoking. I was a specialist. You are in the family medicine and primary care world. My specialty did allow me to have a degree of relationship with the patient and in oncology, but you describe this parallel universe of, families, siblings, weddings, where you're witnessing life unfold. And there is not an easy roadmap for that. And it is hard to judge success or performance or outcome because we come with so many different perspectives. But if we keep that longitudinal relationship as the catalyst to drive what we want, then I think that fits in nicely. And I want to talk a little bit about what we talked about relative to APPs, right? So APPs, intelligent, competent, but they don't have the same training and the same degree of testing and performance and board certification. So you and I talked about some of the skill gaps that they have or performance variations. So as you begin to think about what is primary care and how investigating chart review, do you have some ideas of how we close some of those gaps relative to APP experience, which then might help scale the primary care universe? So I know that was a long question. Go for it.
The way I think about what you're asking is I actually think it's less about one's credentials. And it's a lot more, it's what we tend to converge to when we, I think, don't have robust enough frameworks to have like an in-depth conversation about this topic. And here's like what I mean. Whether someone is good at care, and we can talk about like how can you define what is good medicine, good care. I think really a lot comes down to experience. And so there are plenty of junior doctors that I think can learn a lot more from experienced nurse practitioners or PAs. And I think it comes down to having seen things, having had reps in managing certain conditions, dealing with side effects, navigating the system. And we just don't have ways to actually figure out where people lack insight. What is it that they don't know that they don't know? And the easy shortcut is, kind of get into this turf war, like who's better prepared for something, who should see one patient but not the other. And there's obviously a business lens on all of this when people think about all things held the same as, this individual can prescribe the same medication, but their market rate is half the cost. Like business people make business decisions based on those economics. And what I think is a lot more meaningful to think about is the tasks to be done in healthcare. And like this is borrowing from other industries. Anthropic put out this paper earlier this year around I think they called it the economic index. And the idea is that they're looking at what are people chatting about on their platform. And then they're taking these chats and figuring out what tasks is the AI accomplishing for the user. And then these tasks require different skills. And so they'll focus on actually getting really intelligent about the skill to complete the job. And so if you take a skill of like, pattern recognition, that skill applies to photographers, radiologists, or anyone else who's looking, through patterns. And then that's what we can actually get smarter on. And so if we take the same lens to primary care or healthcare at large, we actually let's look at the tasks that are required to be done. So, if someone has diabetes, the tasks is managing diabetes or diagnosing diabetes. And then we figure out what is the skill required for handling that. We generally think about procedures very similarly. Are you competent enough to do a joint injection? You do 10 of them and, let's say you become proficient or you meet whatever standard the institution requires. But when it gets into the fuzzy world of chronic disease and primary care, we don't have a way to deal with that. And so we use credentials as a proxy. Did you go to school? Did you pass the test? Then you can go ahead and do these skills, so to speak. But with shifting economics, shifting workforce composition, we've seen a lot historically that there are institutions that allow students to go through online-only programs and then start seeing patients in the real world. And it doesn't matter right now. It's unfortunately been focused around nurse practitioners, but same thing. If there are med schools that popped up that were just purely internet-based, and then you could prescribe medications and potentially not have enough experience to handle things in the real world, I mean, it's the same approach. Then those new physicians of a different kind, I think, should have some sort of insight into their performance.
So in keeping with the idea of the chart review as a way of extracting what are low-level tasks, what are medium, what are high-level tasks, and then distilling that in a batch, if you will, as well as the experience of whether it's a seasoned APP with a junior doctor or a seasoned doctor with a junior APP, do you have something in mind by which that extraction and that condensation will then elevate the performance of either person that, like you said, just doesn't yet have that full complement of experience?
So the way I think it just takes time to do this, and usually we do it manually. And if you're elbow to elbow to someone in a clinic, you're able to bounce ideas off each other, and you can get a sense of maybe someone is struggling with a particular topic. But that just requires time. And we obviously have some regulations that create reasons for doing chart reviews or peer reviews for compliance purposes. But unfortunately, with business pressures, they all kind of condense to a checkbox. And then, I'd say like in parallel at the same time, what we're seeing in the industry is that chart reviews are generally utilized for billing optimization because there's a business case to be made. And so then, unfortunately, I think that can enable and accelerate the less optimal type of care as long as it drives revenue. And so like those are like two things that you have to hold in memory as you think about this world. But traditionally, it's very hard to get insight into an individual clinician's competencies because we just don't really track it like that, especially for chronic conditions. And now you can, accelerate and amplify manual processes with technology. And that's kind of where, I'm spending a lot of my time doing is how can we, in a sense, observe what people are doing and then get a personalized idea for each clinician where they might be excelling, where they might be struggling with, and then given that information, personalize the feedback and the approach to getting better to each person uniquely. And I think that is really powerful. It's the business case that is much harder to crack. And in any enterprise technology company that's VC backed, it often gets overlooked because it just doesn't like the squeeze isn't justified by the outcome, right?
Yeah. So let's park the finances just for the moment, even though they're not unimportant, but just for the sake of this discussion. Are there any examples, whether you use diabetes or the example of the neurologist, say, please return to the PCP? Do you have any real life examples of how this thinking that you've done at XBC with chart review with a clinical scenario to elevate the performance of the people involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So like the very tangible thing that has meaningful impacts both on the patient experience and the finances, and just the clinician feeling more confident and in their ability to care for patients, is around appropriate referrals. So let's take a particular case of ER referrals. So some of our customers are urgent cares, and we basically look at visits that resulted in ER referral. And we try to identify elements that could have avoided these visits. And, there's different statistics around how much money these visit costs and what percentage of them actually are avoidable, because, the patients end up going to ER and either the same outcome happens because, all the tests were already done in urgent care, or the ER physician feels like, this was an inappropriate referral. Basically, it creates a lot of friction and frustration in the system for everybody. And what we're noticing is when we're looking at charts for like ER referrals, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Most people, if they lack certain knowledge of either just gathering the right information and questions, they end up taking shortcuts and sending someone out inappropriately or prematurely. For example, certain tests could have been done that would have found the diagnosis earlier. So there's like an element of almost like resource management that is both cognitive resource and available resource locally. And then we can identify these elements. That is it like lack of knowledge of doing a better history taking or getting the right physical exam maneuvers that can elicit the diagnosis? Or is it doing a type of management where you might have close follow-up by phone the following day or return to clinic the next day and actually avoiding an entire trip to the ER? So we're able to identify those elements, and then we're able to identify which clinicians struggle across these different domains, and then support guidance on how to improve and basically meet their learning needs, close the educational gaps. And then we can give out CME for all of this. And it basically creates a really enduring process where people are excited to get feedback in a meaningful way. You see less of inappropriate referrals happen, and then patients get a better outcome.
So as you know, I work with chief medical officers in a variety of settings, primarily hospital settings, but I do have a large number of folks that I work with in just pure outpatient ambulatory settings, not so much in the urgent care, but that they get into value-based arrangements with payers about reducing, unexplained or inappropriate ER visits. I don't like those terms, but let's just say they want a reduction in ER visits. And there are other tangible measures we could get into. To the extent that you can develop tools that will improve the decision making, so as a trained physician, you're worried about what is the diagnosis, what's the problem, what's the treatment. But in the real world, it's 4:45, your staff is leaving, and you may just say, please go to the emergency room, or I appreciate you coming in a hurry, but I can't finish what I need to do. As opposed to, in my practice, we used to be very concerned about folks with neutropenic fever. And there was a gut instinct amongst many doctors, just go to the emergency room because you might die of overwhelming sepsis. Well, it turns out there was only a very small number of patients that actually were at serious risk of neutropenic fever. And those are the patients you saw in training who had ALL or AML and a few other of the hematologic malignancies. But if you had the average patient with an average solid tumor who was febrile at 4:45, there's a whole bunch of things you can do and say, and please come in at 8:00 in the morning and call me if there are any issues. And they never needed to go to the emergency room. Within 48 hours, either through the use of, Neupogen or the right antibiotic. They effervesce, their white count is better, and everybody's better. So this is the kind of concept you're talking about, where there can be some steps to intervene to reduce an unnecessary experience. Is that right?
I think that you captured it well. And I think this happens not because I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to blame the person, because everyone, who works in healthcare, it's really hard to try to be to have bad intent and continue to do this work. I think it's sometimes, like you said, the system might force us into certain behaviors, whether there's volume pressures or business pressures. But I just think that it is somewhat in our ability to improve the situation and do something about it that has really outsized returns. And just the fact that we cannot have trusted mentors by our side all the time, that's why it's hard to make these decisions. So we have to find a way to continue. Just like think about professional athletes. They're at the top of the game, yet they still have coaches, and sometimes multiple coaches. And, always encourage people to use all available tools to them during the workflow, right? Like all the CDS tools, so that you can know what is the right thing to do. But we rarely get feedback after we've made all the decisions using all of our resources, and that's I think how we actually get better.
The feedback loop is incredibly important in adult learning. We all know that. It's even in early childhood development. But I fundamentally agree with you that when I come out of training, I send everybody to the emergency room for neutropenic fever. Well, the science evolves, the medical literature evolves. You don't need to do that. But how do I keep up with that? And then what processes can I instill? So to your point, if I had an active, iterative tool that said, no, here are the things you could do, and you have a 99% chance that the patient outcome will be great with avoiding unnecessary things. I think that's the goal that we're speaking about. It's not that I'm trying to meet somebody's metric to reduce the ER visit. I'm trying to do the right thing. But in 1988, the right thing is send him to the emergency room. In 2026, it may be a couple of quick things that are up to date, that are iterative, and then over time you get to a pattern and a pattern recognition. I don't need to send everybody to the emergency room, because I have this handheld coach, or hit the ball to the left, hit the ball to the oh, now I know how to hit the ball to the left. Same thing. Well, let's pivot a little bit, because one of the concerns about these intelligent tools, whether it has been through your own chart review that is sharing with you information about ways you could perform better, how do we avoid reducing our judgment making, our critical thinking, or de-skilling, or unintentionally unskilling? I think you've thought about that, and I wonder what you might share with us about those risks, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. And, there are lots of smart people thinking about this. Like Eric Topol has put out a recent article about de-skilling and never skilling that helps frame things when you're starting to use technology to make decisions for you before you've ever developed any tools to actually make the decisions for yourself. Just the same way, if you're, immobile, you get to, your muscles atrophy. And physiologically, I don't think the brain works exactly like that, but it's a similar idea.
When you get older, Paulius, give me a call, then I'll share with you what happens.
That's right. So I think we have lots of lessons from other industries. So the aviation industry has dealt with automation for decades. And, I've actually learned in talking to people who are in aviation safety how seriously they take anything related to human life. Aviation, like you expose people to really risky situations. And so when planes go down, it's bad for the entire industry. So what's fascinating is that when there are discoveries made in instrumentation around making safer flight predictions or anything related to that, the industry tends to get together and share these so that everyone can benefit, as almost like there's a strategic economic advantage to that. What is also fascinating is how the privilege to fly a plane, I've learned that pilots are almost always, I don't know if I can get the frameworks, the timelines right, but it's either 6 or 12 months from constantly having their flight privileges taken away if they don't recertify or prove that they can continue to do that. We don't really do that in healthcare. Like once you get a license, you have to mess up really bad to lose it. And so the way that pilots are trained, they're put into situations to like mock scenarios where they have to simulate difficult conditions. They have to intermittently fly without the autopilot and do maneuvers that rarely come up. And I think there's so many parallels in healthcare. And so automation is just beginning to inch into the whole ecosystem. And we're going to be facing the same challenges and the same opportunities to solve these things. So we usually simulate in healthcare things that are rare. And we usually think about them like heart attacks. So we practice CPR, or you don't do this procedure a lot, like a spinal tap, then you simulate the practicing of that. But if we actually think about chronic disease, which is like the highest cost driver in the US healthcare system, the burden is humongous. People are becoming multimorbid, where they have more than one condition at a time. And while chronic disease is ubiquitous, I actually think it's a rare event from a training point of view. So the ability to see hypertension from start to finish in one person, and start to finish or start to maintenance, is really tough because patients don't always follow up. They change insurance, and therefore they change doctors or clinics. They move away, or the care team moves away. And it just creates so much fragmentation. And what happens is that we actually get little slices and slivers of what it's like to treat hypertension. We call it the same disease, but it's actually very different in a young person versus an old person versus someone who is on 4 medications versus 2 medications. And there's just no way to do that. And so part of our upskilling and training, we actually create simulations and use EMRs as a cockpit, so to speak. And so we let people play through the visits as if they were taking patients in the real world. And that's how you can build capacity and experience. And this is how you can do very targeted interventions based on what we identify through chart reviews, and actually help people upskill and improve in a way that is going to meet the needs of the population that they see, and is going to help match up maybe organizational goals, like reducing ER referrals that are inappropriate, and align with the skill set and skill gaps that a clinician might exhibit.
I love this. I mean, you've really touched my heart. I had Crohn's disease diagnosed in medical school, and at the time there were very few options. The go-to was high-dose steroids, and as I approach my later years, I am multimorbid because of the tremendous amount of steroids I had as osteoporosis and a whole bunch of other things I could rattle off. To your point, it was not clear that people knew what that longitudinal long-term impact would be like. And so some resident in the GI clinic said, take 1 milligram per kilogram and I'll see you in a few months. And then I never saw him again. I moved on, he moved on, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think this is brilliant, insightful, and going back to the aviation, the pilots that were, pilots repeatedly have to go back through training. And the horrible tragedies of the 737 MAX have brought that flashlight to bear, that if people were adequately trained with a new tool, a new technology, a new way of managing flight, they could avoid a complication. But you give a new tool to someone who's untrained, who didn't know the proper response when things were happening. And so there may need to be a requirement with these new advances, the way we think of what's going to help us improve, that we're going to have to retrain and retrain and retrain. Although we think of it just as learning, it's probably deeper than that. So I've shared a little personal item with me, and I wonder if you would share with the listeners why this investment in these tools and think about primary care are so important to you. What is the problem you personally would love to try to solve, notwithstanding business and life and other wishes, but why is this so personal to you?
I think, it's existential for me. I would say as I get older, I don't want to keep wearing my doctor hat as a patient, right? Like I'll have to interface with the health system more and more, no matter how much preventative care I do. That's just part of life. And I just want to try to make people who will take care of me and my family as capable as possible. It's not to blame the people; it's the system that they become a product of that just creates the circumstances where they cannot thrive and do good work. And I want to make do something about it, basically. So, in a sense, it's a selfish pursuit, but at the same time, I think that's with a lot of what I do, it's investing in people. So there's lots of cash and efforts are placed on making AI better. I think that's really cool. There's a role for that. But my focus is really around making people better and then creating the circumstances where they can do their best work. So I will always index on that. And I think that whatever technology, and maybe it is less technology sometimes that is the right solution. I think I'll keep coming back to the problem to be solved rather than one solution trying to be applied in many situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I want to pick your brain a little bit more. Do you have a sort of a vision, right, wrong, or indifferent, of like what that future primary care space or enterprise? So you're 65, you're 70, you're 75, your health is changing. You don't want to wear the doctor hat. You're no longer practicing. Maybe you are. What would that team look like to you? Obviously, it's many years in the future, but just imagine what would that sound and look like with all of these tools that you're working on and what other people are working on?
Well, I think, I think that's a cool conversation and probably a bigger conversation than what we have time for.
Well, give it a shot, my
Yeah,
man. Just give it a shot.
I'll pick a slice of it. And I think what so like in what we do right now, right? We work with different medical groups, primary care and urgent care centers, and we have really good data and insight of what clinicians are good at, what conditions that they treat, or what competencies that they exhibit, where they're particularly good at handling individuals, in their 60s who have these two conditions and maybe on these three medications. We have that information right now, not just us, like as a company, but I think that other organizations might have that data, and finding a way to match that up with a patient that's in the local community is really hard. And so I think that in the future we're gonna be able to choose, which physician we see, not based on like what insurance tells us, but basically based on our needs. And so how do you personalize the matchmaking between someone's capabilities and skills with the patient's needs? It requires multiple things: identifying the needs from the patient perspective and then identifying the capabilities and skills from the clinician perspective. Because right now, you walk in the door and anyone working at that facility would see you because they have a degree, license to practice medicine. But realistically, one of the persons there is better suited to see you. And I don't know if it's because they've had more experience in, your diagnosis or not. And this matchmaking happens already, just blindfolded. So I think there's opportunity to have more visibility into that.
That is so utterly fascinating. And I know most of our listeners enjoy the audio of this and not the video, but I was staring off into outer space when you were suggesting that, because I'll use again just another real world example. So the oncologic world went through convulsions about highly personalized medicine and highly personalized therapy. If we could get down to the oncogene or the specific proteins that are, or the checkpoint inhibitors, we could really I don't have to give everybody adriamycin and see X% get congestive heart failure. I can wipe that off the chalkboard and begin to hyper personalize based on all of the pharmacogenetics and the genetics and the oncotypes, et cetera, et cetera. But you're making it much broader. And not only are you suggesting that there can be hyper personalized approaches to you as a patient or me as a patient, but that there's an equal hyper-personalized provider side of that: physician, nurse practitioner, care team, specialist, what have you. And that is a remarkable notion, because one of the tensions or friction points that I've witnessed in my career is the specialists become more and more subspecialized and more and more subspecialized, but they still take a wide swath of patients because of their specialty, because there aren't enough subspecialty boards. And then the primary care doctor is on the receiving end when that special neurologist said, just go back to primary care. And maybe there's a different primary care who is skilled in these handful of conditions that you're referring to, sort of a neuro primary care. I'm imagining that. Do my thoughts match up with what you were describing, or am I completely in a different universe now?
No, I think you captured well what I was trying to convey. Basically, we've known precision medicine to be about having the right molecule for the right pathology, right? And like more of the mechanism of action, very robotic approach almost. What I really think, precision medicine is really more about having the precision around people. That it kind of goes back, it's like these two big camps, right? Like, do you develop the technology or do you develop the people and insights around people? And primary care, we're specialists in relationships. We're specialists in our patient. And that is really not conceived as a specialty because that sounds strange. People even make fun of primary care that we're the communications major of med school, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, you have a bone pain, go to the bone doctor. That's what PCP does. But realistically, when you specialize in relationships, you know that person really well. And we didn't even talk about having the understanding of people's contexts and value set, and maybe using like the AI lingo, how like context engineering is so popular. It's really about like it's primary context physician in a sense for that person. And we finally, I think, have some technology that is able to remove the true manual like effort and doing things in a way that technology is meant to do. And then, because if you think about who captures the values of a patient, it is the primary care. And then we try to contextualize that and help them navigate the system. The good specialists will do that too.
Yeah, it's come full circle because a long time ago, sir, there were very few tools that you had at your disposal other than talking to the patient with an old-fashioned history and physical. And, it's often been said that if you wait long enough, the patient will give you the diagnosis when they share with you what neighborhood they come from, their economic background, et cetera, et cetera. So we structuralized in our ultimate reductionist model of understanding every molecule, and then the system was built around it, and structure and regulatory. So now we gotta like wade through all of that to get back to, do I know who this person is, and what's that context to drive the best equation out of that relationship? And I think that's just a beautiful way. We can probably wrap this up very nicely with that, but I would love to give you any space for last thoughts, last words for the listeners. Anything else you want to share with the listeners?
Thanks for asking great questions. I'm someone who is very open about things that I learned that I think advance the field. I dedicate a lot of my work to advancing primary care in different ways, whether it's through one-on-one direct patient care, or technology, or supporting founders, creating technologies. That's how I spend a lot of my time. And so I think that if anyone is thinking about wanting to solve problems that are big and interesting and difficult in primary care, definitely reach out. I'm happy to share everything that I know. I think that I'm a lot more interested in advancing the field rather than just advancing my own company or my work. And I think that's how we better humanity and society.
Well, I will give you my endorsement because you have been very open to talking with me and sharing ideas, and it's been a lot of fun. And I thank you very much for being on the show, Paulius.
Yeah, thank you.
You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO? Then connect with me and check out our website, thefirechiefcmo.com. If you want to learn more about XPC and how to improve your workforce, then connect with the talented and dynamic Dr. Mui on LinkedIn and check out his website, xprimarycare.com. Again, xprimarycare.com. As most of you know, I love talking with CMOs and the thought leaders who want to help you do your job and do it better. So get out there and be a chief, be a leader, be a champion for upskilling the workforce. But whatever you do, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, remember, let's be careful out there.